a role there.
Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Moscow is ready to end the war in Ukraine through peace talks, while claiming Kyiv shows only limited readiness for dialogue. He also asserts Russian forces hold the strategic initiative and are advancing along the front line as Ukrainian troops retreat. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warns that Russia would inevitably move against Poland if it succeeds in defeating Ukraine. Speaking in Warsaw, he urges Ukraine and Poland to stand united to stop Moscow's advance. EU leaders agree to borrow money to loan 90 billion euros to Ukraine for its defence over the next 2 years. They drop, for now, a plan to use frozen Russian assets after divisions within the bloc. A global hunger monitor says there is no longer famine in Gaza after access for humanitarian and commercial food deliveries improves following an October ceasefire. The IPC warns conditions remain critical, however, after previously saying more than 500,000 people faced famine. US President Donald Trump says he does not rule out war with Venezuela, according to an interview with NBC News. He also signals more oil tanker seizures days after ordering a blockade of sanctioned vessels to pressure Nicolas Maduro's government. Authorities say the suspect in last weekend's mass shooting at Brown University is found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Investigators say the gunman, identified as a Portuguese national, is also responsible for killing an MIT professor 2 days later. Violent protests erupt in Bangladesh after youth leader Sharif Osman Hadi dies from gunshot wounds sustained in Dhaka last week. Authorities say media buildings are torched and vandalized as the interim government declares a day of mourning and urges calm. The US Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff is set to hold talks in Miami with officials from Qatar, Egypt and Turkey on the next phase of the Gaza ceasefire. A White House official says the meetings come as efforts continue to sustain the truce despite reported violations on the ground. Well, those are the headlines for the hour, but we first start in the United States, and in an interview, US President Donald Trump indicated that he is not ruling out the possibility of war with Venezuela. Trump also announced plans for additional seizures of oil tankers near Venezuela following the recent capture of a sanctioned tanker off its coast. The United States has intensified its pressure on President Nicolas Maduro's government, targeting Venezuela's oil exports, the nation's primary income source. Meanwhile, the United States has also deployed advanced military aircraft, including F-35 stealth fighter jets, to Puerto Rico as part of a significant military buildup in the Caribbean. Trump ordered a blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers entering or leaving Venezuela, a move that has sparked backlash from Maduro, who claims the United States is attempting to seize control of Venezuelans' vast oil reserves. The situation remains very tense, with Trump previously hinting at the potential for land strikes in the country. We're now joined by Keith Vaz. He is a former British minister and he joins us live from London. Keith, of course, another event today that we haven't mentioned has been another boat strike which has killed 5 people in the Eastern Pacific. Of course, now Donald Trump is using some harsh language. Constant military build-up, the strikes against these boats, and the seizure of oil tankers. What do you think that, and now these comments, what do you think that signals, Keith?
Good afternoon, Thomas. What it signals is the situation is getting very dangerous indeed.
Mm,
If you look at what's been going on in the last couple of weeks, what's happened just now with the seizure of boats, the bombing of boats, the war language that is being used by Donald Trump, I think Venezuela needs to be on guard,
mm,
but so has the whole of South America. This is America's backyard. And just as Russia doesn't really want anyone to be involved in its backyard, so the Americans are very clear that they don't want to see anyone else get involved there. But it's also clear that President Trump has had Venezuela in his sights for a lot of time. They have got such massive oil reserves,
mm.
and to that extent, what he would like to have is a friendly government in Venezuela. Let us be very clear what is being attempted here. It is actually regime change. This is not just about getting Venezuela to behave, though there is no indication that they are misbehaving on the international level,
Mm.
getting them to take better control of the boats that are in the Pacific, even though there's no indication that those boats actually are under the control of the Venezuelan government. It is essential, therefore, that the world realizes that we might be on the brink of something extremely serious. And the problem is the institutions that exist to counter this, the United Nations, the NATO alliance, the influence that might be there with European partners, no longer hold sway over Donald Trump.
Mm. And Keith, alarming as this is, as alarming as it is, what would de-escalate this? Would it just simply be removing Maduro from the government? Is that the key aim here?
Well, I think so. And
Mm,
that has been the aim of successive governments in America. They want to install a friendly government there. In the past, it used to be done through the shadows, through coups that were perpetrated by groups inside countries. This is quite blatant and quite open. This is an American president talking about the possibility of war. You then get in other players, which is the Russians and the Chinese, both who have interests in Venezuela. They will get involved and engaged in what is being proposed. A favorite phrase of yours, Thomas, is the geopolitical landscape in the world. Well, the geopolitical landscape is going to change
mm.
if there is any attempt to replace the regime in Venezuela with one friendly to the American government. There's no indication that Venezuela can take on America. So it's difficult to know what the solution is to this. What does he want the Venezuelan president to do? Come to the White House, sit down, have a chat, sign a peace agreement. But how can you have a peace agreement when there is no war? So it's difficult to understand what is going on. But as we've all said, these are dangerous times, and this is an alarming escalation of the situation.
You've just spoken about it previously with your first answer, Keith, but if Donald Trump did decide to invade Venezuela, what does that mean from an international law standpoint? And also, of course, you have the likes of the United Nations and other bodies that, of course, are going to have an issue with this if it does escalate to that level. What does it mean for them?
Well, it means that they are standing as, if they say nothing, they are standing aside and allowing what Vladimir Putin did in Ukraine.
Mm,
It's exactly the same. And the Russians can quite rightly turn around and say, hang on a minute, um, you criticized us because we have invaded Ukraine, and yet you're going to Venezuela and you are overthrowing the government there. So actually, I think even though the Russians are quite friendly to the Venezuelans and have big investments there, the issue is this: if this happens, it kind of justifies what Russia has done in Ukraine. It removes the moral high ground that existed, and it puts enormous pressure on countries like France and the United States, United Kingdom, and Poland and all these other countries that have said President Putin has done the wrong thing, because all he can do is point to South America and say, well, that's what your best friend has done. And nobody will criticize, of course, because there's always the risk that you'll have additional sanctions put on you. We are living in extraordinary times, Thomas. It is an incredible time to be watching the geopolitical landscape, the changes that are going on. It is something that we need to bear in mind.
Keith Vaz, as always, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for taking the time and joining us here on NewsX World. We now move on over to Europe, and Russian President Vladimir Putin has criticised a European Union decision to set aside a proposal to use frozen Russian assets as collateral for a loan to Ukraine. Speaking at his annual end-of-year press conference, Putin described the plan as a robbery, accusing the EU of attempting to illegally seize Russian property. He said the idea ultimately failed because it would have carried what he called grave consequences for those involved. Putin added that Moscow would defend its interests through legal channels, warning that any move to confiscate Russian assets would undermine international law and trust in global financial systems. The European Union has been debating how to use profits or assets frozen since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but concerns over legal risks have slowed progress. Okay, a huge development today, of course. The European Union approving a $90 billion loan for Ukraine to fund their military operations over the next 2 years. However, that highly controversial plan, which would be using frozen Russian assets that's inside the European Union, has been rejected today. However, we don't expect that plan to go away anytime soon. Noise will continue. Belgium, of course, having the biggest problem with the plan, as the European Union states weren't prepared to share legal responsibility if this plan is seen as breaking international law. Vladimir Putin spoke about it today in his yearly press conference, where he's stated many things, and of course has reacted to this, where he has said that the use of frozen Russian assets within the European Union would be a robbery, and that Moscow would indeed pursue those legal channels if this plan was indeed approved. Okay, joining us now is Professor Rohan Gunaratne. He is an international affairs expert and joining us live from Singapore. Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you. President Putin calls the use of these frozen assets robbery. Under international law, is this actually theft, or could it be seen as lawful countermeasures following this act of aggression which Russia perpetrated on Ukraine?
Thomas, it's a standard method used by governments. For instance, there has been seizures of funds, assets of North Korea. So like that, this time, the international community, the Western nations, they are going after Russia. So I believe that it is legal. But again, if the West wants to resolve the problem with the Russians, this is not the way forward, because it will make the Russians more angry, and then also there will be no resolution to the Ukrainian dispute. So there should be cooperation and not confrontation. This is an act that will be deemed as a hostile act by the West. The Russians will believe that the Western nations are hostile towards Russia. So I think it's not going to help to resolve the bigger dispute between the West and Russia that has led to the Ukrainian war.
If this plan does truly go away after today, and the EU decides it cannot use these Russian assets full stop, what other funding mechanisms realistically exist that doesn't put strain on the Western taxpayer? Of course, it's been hugely contentious in right-wing circles, especially at the West's funding of the Ukraine war. What's your analysis?
So the Western nations are supporting the Ukrainian war because Western nations know that this is not simply a war between Ukraine and Russia. The Russians want to expand their interests along its border into Europe because of the NATO buildup, because of Western nations also placing their weapons on the border on the European side of the border with Russia. So this dispute has to be resolved. It's not just a fight between Ukraine and Russia, but the most recent action that you described very well is going to make this conflict further away from resolution.
Yes, do stay with us, Professor Gunaratne, as we have further news coming our viewers' way. But for now, we have breaking news coming out of the Indo-Pacific, and at least 9 people have been injured after an attack at a Taipei subway station. Taiwan's Premier Cho Jung-tae said a suspect released smoke bombs inside the station and then attacked bystanders. Details on the victims were not immediately released. Taiwan's local reports suggest that the attacker is suspected to have killed himself after the incident. Authorities say the motive behind the attack remains unclear as the investigations continue. We will, of course, bring you all the updates on that developing story and all the visuals that we get as soon as we obtain them. We now move on and back over to Europe for our next story. And Ukraine has carried out a drone strike on a Russian Shadow Fleet tanker in the Mediterranean Sea, marking the first such attack so far from home. A Ukrainian security official told Reuters the vessel named Kendil was hit more than 2,000 kilometers from Ukraine. The strike caused critical damage to the tanker, and the ship was empty at the time of the attack, but the incident also highlights Ukraine's expanding drone reach beyond the Black Sea and into the wider region. Professor Gunaratne joins us once again. Of course, on the ground, warfare does not stop. Russia, of course, making advances on the ground, but here we see that Ukraine does in fact still have strong military capabilities, striking a Russian Shadow Fleet tanker 2,000 kilometers away from shore in the Black Sea. What does this say about the current military capabilities of Kiev, Professor Gunaratne?
Ukraine has expanded their capabilities very significantly because Western nations, the Americans, and the European countries are supporting them. Ukraine itself doesn't have capability to fight a mighty Russia. So it is Western support and assistance that has given them that edge. With regard to this particular attack, this is not the first time the Ukrainians attacked the shadow fleet of the Russians that is transporting oil from Russia to China and to India. But what is important is that this particular attack was on a ship of the Shadow Fleet at a time where it had no oil. There was a similar attack a few weeks ago in the Bosphorus, where again 2 ships of the Russian Shadow Fleet was sunk. So if you look at the pattern of these attacks, it appears to me that it will continue, and it will become increasingly difficult for Russia to move its oil that is now sanctioned by the United States and by European countries to India and to China and to other countries that is buying Russian oil.
Yes, Professor Gunaratne, thank you very much as always for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you on the programme. We now move over to South Asia for our next story, and Pakistan has said that it had detected abrupt variations of water flows on a river crucial to its farmers, accusing neighbouring India of releasing water without warning in defiance of a major treaty that New Delhi suspended this year. India in April announced it was suspending the Indus Water Treaty in the lead-up to the armed conflict between the nuclear-armed neighbours and following a deadly attack in Kashmir. Pakistan has said that any attempt to stop or divert the flow of water into the country would be considered an act of war. Foreign Minister Mohammed Ishaq Dar told foreign diplomats that Pakistan's Water Treaty Commissioner had written a letter to his Indian counterpart over unusual abrupt variations observed in the flow of the Chenab River from December the 7th to the 15th, similar to changes detected in April and May. Joining us now is Colonel Sanjeet Sirohi, an international relations and defence expert, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Colonel Sirohi, for joining us here. India says that, of course, it has suspended the Indus Waters Treaty. What are your thoughts in how this might develop? And under international law, can this decades-old water sharing treaty be unilaterally suspended during a security crisis?
Well, thank you, Thomas. Now, this is a very, very important topic as far as the Pakistan and India is concerned. And our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, had very categorically said that the water and the blood cannot flow together. Because after the Pahalgam attack, we had suspended this treaty. And this treaty, let me tell you, if we go back to the history, it was always in favor of Pakistan. Because in 1960, our Prime Minister Pandit Nehru thought at that point of time in his wisdom that if we give concession to Pakistan, we will be good neighbors. But I think that thinking has gone wrong. And now what we have seen after 65 or 75 years, that this good gesture of India towards Pakistan was not taken in the correct spirit. And as a result of that, there are a lot of activities from Pakistan, the terrorist activity took place. And it was high time that India decided that this is not going to work. If we have to live like a good neighbor, then we have to behave like a good neighbor also. So that is the point. And second thing which I want to bring out is that in 1960, when this treaty was signed in favor of Pakistan, the population of India was 436 million, whereas population of Pakistan was only 46 million. So there is a disparity. The India population was 10 times more than Pakistan. So the requirement of water is also should be equal. But in our case, what has happened is that we have given the water of all the three rivers, that is Indus, Jhelum and Chenab, to Pakistan, and only Ravi, Beas, Satluj rivers are, which the water of these three rivers can be used by India. And that too, we cannot significantly alter their flow. So point is, what Ishaq Dar Saab is saying is that all these things, they matter if the neighbors are good. But if the neighbors are not good, then if this treaty has been suspended, I think it is the lesson which Pakistan must learn. And it is not only India which is going to create problems for Pakistan as the water is concerned. Even Afghanistan is planning to construct a dam on Kunar River, which flows from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and goes back to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, that is the more source of only source of water in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So all these things Pakistan should have thought of.
Colonel, the Indus Water Treaty and the breakdown of it, of course, the consequences would appear in Pakistan, with 220 to 240 million people using it for the food system, drinking water, irrigation, hydropower, including crops and cities, etc. What's the end game here? Of course, the consequences for the suspension of this treaty is going to affect a whole lot of people across the border if the long game truly is to permanently suspend this treaty. What is it?
Look, Thomas, the point is that what I am trying to bring out is what you are saying is absolutely right, that 80% of Pakistan agriculture requirement is from the Indus water system. So if there is some fluctuation or there is some control over the waters or the water level does not flow the way it was flowing earlier, then there will be problems for Pakistan. But that problem Pakistan has to realize that yes, we are going to save this, have to face this problem, so we must do something about it. And again, talking in that language that this will be considered as act of war is not going to solve the problem. If Pakistan thinks by talking or by this rhetoric of saying that this will be considered as act of war and they can pressurize India to come back to the same pre-April situation, it is not going to happen like this. It can only happen when you talk, and when you talk in a manner that there is a trust between the two nations. The problem is there is no trust. Because every time there was Shimla Agreement, what happened to Shimla Agreement? They have never followed it. They have always taken the Kashmir issue to international forums. There was a Lahore Declaration. What happened to Lahore Declaration? There was a Kargil after that. So I think what Pakistan problem
What's
is...
wrong with taking the Kashmir... Sorry, just for viewers that don't know, what's wrong with taking the Kashmir issue to international forums?
Like when in 1972, after 71 war, when both the prime ministers of both the countries had decided that whatever the problems are between the two countries, those will be bilaterally sorted out. So if that was taken into consideration, then why take it again back to UN? So I think with all this, nothing is going to be solved. So the problem is that we should sit and we should solve the problem bilaterally. Then only you can solve this problem. Otherwise, you will not be able to solve this problem. Thomas.
Colonel Sirohi, thank you very much. I'm sure we could talk about this for hours, but unfortunately we've ran out of time. Thank you very much for joining us. We move on now, and the US crypto industry is celebrating major wins in 2025, all because of pro-crypto policies under President Donald Trump's second term. Key victories include the SEC rolling back stringent crypto accounting rules and dismissing lawsuits against major exchanges like Coinbase. Additionally, a new law regulating dollar-pegged crypto tokens has provided clarity. However, the momentum may not last, as legislation to resolve key market structure issues has stalled in the Senate, and industry leaders are concerned about future regulatory challenges. With 2026 elections looming, uncertainty hangs over whether Congress will pass critical reforms. The crypto sector is now hoping for a SEC innovation exemption to maintain progress. Okay, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates.